The original Medal of Honor made a strong first impression to EA, who ended up buying the developer just before the game had released. This resulted in the publisher greenlighting several sequels, one being an exclusive Medal of Honor title on the PC. This would be known as Allied Assault and revered as one of the best entries within the franchise. Allied Assault ended up being a huge success and was developed by a completely different team than the first two Medal of Honor games. This same team would go on to start the Call of Duty franchise. While through most of Medal of Honor's life, the franchise was mainly released on the home consoles at the time, but there were a few other PC entries that came after Allied Assault. One of those games was Pacific Assault, that aimed to bring that island-hopping confrontation that was introduced with Rising Sun on consoles. This entry often gets overlooked, and while it is not as good as Allied Assault, it is a solid first-person shooter. Join me as we take a look back at Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. DreamWorks Interactive was a game studio that was in a bit of a hard situation during the PS1 generation. Their company had lacked the necessary hits to stay afloat, and was eventually bought by the publisher Electronic Arts. At the same time, they were hard at work on a World War II shooter known as Medal of Honor. The game released after EA's acquisition of the developer, and this first-person shooter was a huge hit. EA saw this one game as a potential franchise that could lend itself well to many sequels. One of those sequels was Medal of Honor Allied Assault. This entry would be made by a completely new developer and would be exclusive to the PC. At the same time, the studio who made the original Medal of Honor was hard at work on Medal of Honor Frontline and an expansion for Allied Assault. Following the success of these two projects, EA Los Angeles, formerly known as DreamWorks Interactive, wanted to shift the focus from the locations they covered in the prior Medal of Honor entries. Up to this point, the series had primarily covered the battles in Europe, with some levels featuring the African front as well. But World War II was a war that was fought in and by many countries. While there still were more stories to be told in the European theater, the studio had this desire to shift the focus more towards a new area of the war that wasn't covered by this series. The developers felt that this shift would bring a new freshness to their upcoming games, with its own unique weapons, enemies, and environments that the players had not yet experienced through Medal of Honor. As such, there were two titles being developed at the same time that would cover the Pacific theater. At this time, EA LA was working on a game for home consoles, and this would be Medal of Honor Rising Sun, and for the PC, it would be a sequel to Allied Assault, and be known as Medal of Honor Pacific Assault.
For more than 2 centuries, the United States Marine Corps has fought for freedom. But their infamy, their legend, was forged during the hell of World War II. Triumph cannot exist without hardship, and the price of victory is paid in the blood of men. Faith, courage, and sacrifice paved their road, and that long journey began in the early hours of December 7, 1941.
The LA team aimed to combine engaging gameplay and scripted cinematic moments with the right amount of historical authenticity. The developers had a long-standing relationship with Captain Dale Dye, who was the consultant on many of the prior Medal of Honor titles. For Rising Sun and Pacific Assault, he took the design, production, art, and sound teams on a Pacific-related trip by visiting all the areas and locations that would be featured in these two games. Dale had access that the development team would not normally have, and the studio jumped at the opportunity to use this experience to make their upcoming projects even better. Authenticity has always been an important element for this franchise. The developers understood that this war was disturbingly real for a generation of people. The efforts made to the authenticity was to respect those that had fought in those actual battles, and as part of this respect, incorporating these elements would greatly improve the experience. In addition to the extensive research trip, the team was able to utilize over 50 hours of authentic battle footage footage from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. For Allied Assault, D-Day was fully realized, and for Pacific Assault, the studio felt that Pearl Harbor was going to be an important event to show to the player. These levels would show the calm before the storm, along with the various sections of the fight. The developers aimed to provide the player with the shock and surprise of the attack, along with the act of fending off the enemy planes and saving fellow soldiers. The campaign would focus on a Marine recruit, and the players would experience an extended tutorial covering the various gameplay elements, while providing the presentation of a training sequence that one might see in a military film. While in the prior games, the player would be fighting beside Allied soldiers, the player could provide orders to the AI, along with ordering them to heal the player if needed. This was all done in an effort to move away from some of the prior arcadey elements of the past, with conveniently placed health pickups. The player would need to rely on their medic for assistance, just like in a real conflict. From a gameplay standpoint, levels would be more focused on large outside locations rather than various tunnels and buildings. The player would need to fight and contend with the various jungle environments, as the enemies would use them to their advantage. Pacific Assault would have several surprise attacks along with enemy snipers waiting in the trees. Some levels would even feature the player fighting through a swamp, and this meant that their vision would be hindered. The physics engine would enhance the presentation, with many structures being fully destructible. For Pacific Assault, the studio would move away from a more scripted nature of the prior AI, and wanted to have enemies within the campaign that acted more like a player in multiplayer. The developers wanted the enemy AI to be unpredictable, allowing for each run through the campaign to be slightly different for each player. As a first for the series, there would be an extended flying level where the player could fully control a plane, attack ground targets, and engage in dogfights. There was a lot of overlap, and much of the same resources and information that was used in the making of Rising Sun was used in Pacific Assault. EA LA was making two games set in the Pacific Theater, but the games would be completely different from each other. Rising Sun was being handcrafted for the consoles, and Pacific Assault would act as a sequel to Allied Assault for the PC. Two very different games covering the same theater. In November 2004, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault was released to the world. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault is the second PC entry for this series. Just like the prior PC release, this is also a first-person shooter with a focus on combat and intense gunfights. Overall, Pacific Assault is a solid game with good shooting and some memorable set pieces, like a multi-step level covering different areas of the attack on Pearl Harbor. The game is a bit stop and go when it comes to its pacing for the first few levels, and it hits a nice groove towards the end of the first night raid. After this point, it's a very enjoyable shooting experience with some speed bumps along the way. Thankfully, this does not have the horrible kickback from Allied Assault, but it also lacks the polish from the very first PC release. There are many aspects to Pacific Assault that can make this game feel very messy at times. Thankfully, it brings it where it counts with fun gameplay and an enjoyable story. Pacific Assault is a first-person shooter with all the expected options that you would find in this genre. You can crouch and prone to avoid enemy fire. You have the option to lean if you want to take a conservative approach to the combat. The shooting is pretty solid with good impact as the enemies have enjoyable death animations, along with blood, but the sound effects can be a bit mixed. Some guns sound better than others, but overall the sounds are not as strong as they were in Allied Assault. As a result, the impact to your hits does most of the heavy lifting with the shooting. Just like in Rising Sun, Pacific Assault does a good job of highlighting how this front was very different than the fight with the Germans. The Japanese will try to ambush you, hide snipers in trees, along with surprise attacks with deadly melee weapons. While some of this can be unintentionally funny, to have someone running at you a long ways to try and hit you with a sword, where up close, this type of an attack can be really terrifying and throw you off balance. Levels are very linear and lack exploration and options to potentially tackle areas in different ways. To the game's credit, there are a handful of sequences where there are 2 paths to take, but I wish that there was more of this stuff in the game. A new addition is how you can control a squad. Here you can give them basic commands, and more importantly, you can order a medic to come and fully heal you. This is a neat feature, but I found myself not really using it that much, nor did I feel like the game really required me to use my squad mechanics to succeed. The squad mechanics feel like a novelty rather than a fully fleshed out feature. The shooting action is solid throughout. The game has a bit of a yo-yo effect when it comes to its pacing for the first few levels. The game first throws you into what is one of the final missions, and then you are pulled back to basic training. The opening mission is short and effective from its story and gameplay, and while there are many enjoyable moments story-wise in the basic training part, it really hurts the pacing to feel like you are now very restricted as you slowly go through a tutorial. By this point, first-person shooters were abundant, and Pacific Assault really wasn't breaking the mold, so I think going full on by having the game fully jump you into the action would have been a better way to keep up the pacing at the start. After basic training in Pearl Harbor, you enter a night raid, and you start to get your feet wet with how the Japanese fight very differently. Towards the end of the mission, the game hits a nice stride as you are clearing out outposts and bases. The levels have a nice mix of jungle and trench fighting with a healthy mix of set pieces. The attack on Pearl Harbor is really well done. You not only need to fend off the enemy planes, but help your fellow soldiers. There is another set piece later on where you need to retake an airfield as well, and this level is really awesome. Planes are crashing all around you, towers are blowing up, and you need to fight both the planes and enemy soldiers. While there are many levels within a jungle, you will fight in different areas of it, like a swamp level that has poor visibility. More variety comes in late into the game with a fun dogfighting level, where you get to man a turret in the sky and then you get to fly the plane for a while. This is pretty good, but you will wish that the controls were just a bit tighter. When it comes to the story, it's pretty good as well. The narration between levels is well done and shows the gravity of the conflict. The cutscenes are a nice mix of in-engine and war footage. There is a good amount of effort to provide some characterization to your squad, and while the script does not provide an extreme amount of development on them, you get more than you usually get in a Medal of Honor game. There's a cinematic angle to many of the cutscenes in this entry, and I really liked it. Plus, the drill sergeant in the basic training level provides some really funny lines. Overall, the story complements the action very well. Like I said before, Pacific Assault is a very enjoyable game, but it does have some small issues that you will notice or get annoyed by during the campaign. There are several turret sections within this game, and if you hold down the fire button for too long, the screen will get blurry. This is an odd choice, and makes the game needlessly hard as you try to see who you are actually shooting at. Along with this, there are an overabundance of a defend the location type of an objective. This just felt overused. There is one short part where you need to defend a boat, but there is no way to heal while you're on the boat, and it is very easy to take damage while you are getting there. So you can end up in a situation where you have no option but to hope to not get hit just to complete this sequence. Thankfully, this part is short, but it doesn't feel play-tested. I do like how you can command your medic to heal you, but I had several instances where my medic would not listen to me and never came and healed me. The AI is not good in this game. The enemy AI is really dumb, which is a bit sad considering that this is a series with very strong AI, at least for the first several games. This is going to feel like an odd comment, but the visual indication showing that you have been shot is very subtle. So much so that you can find yourself taking a lot of damage and not really noticing it. While the kickback from being shot in Allied Assault was a bit too much, I think a small amount of kickback would have been great here to provide the right amount of information so that the player can react quickly. Overall, the game feels very messy at times, and I also miss the aspect of the story and the gameplay where you are playing as a spy for the Allies. The story here only has you fighting in a unit, and I miss the spy aspect to this series. It allowed for some really cool, enjoyable undercover sections in the best entries of these games. Overall, Pacific Assault has a good amount of flaws, but when you are in a shootout, you will find yourself having way too much fun to really get mad at the issues. The flaws are noticeable, but do not ruin the experience. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault is a solid entry within the series with some flawed areas as well. When it comes to the game, the shooting action is solid with some really good impact to your hits. Pacific Assault offers a variety of locations that keeps the action interesting, from jungles, swamps, beaches, bunkers, and a lot more. The story takes a bit of a different approach as we focus on a group of Marines. While I miss the special ops side of Medal of Honor in this title, the story here is good with a good use of old war footage and in-game cutscenes, along with quality narration. Like most Medal of Honor titles, the soundtrack is really good and aids in the presentation. There are also a good amount of flaws that makes Pacific Assault feel rather messy at times. The allied AI can sometimes not be responsive, along with some dumb enemies. The first few missions have a yo-yo-like effect when it comes to the pacing, but thankfully it finds its footing once we get to the island fighting. Usually when the PC-related Medal of Honor games are discussed, Allied Assault is the one that steals most of the attention. Pacific Assault is one that often gets forgotten about. This entry is not as strong as Allied Assault, but it has plenty of positive elements along with good gameplay that easily makes this one that any first-person shooter fan should check out. I recommend Pacific Assault. If you are interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.